Good morning, friends. My name is Father Brian Christopher. I'm with the Jesuit Community of Belize. It's nice to be here with you again as we continue this Lenten journey. So today we're going to change gears a little bit. We've been talking about discernment. We've been talking about the image of God that's underneath the synod that we're participating in. But today we're going to shift gears and we're going to start talking about what it would look like for us to be a church that dialogues. Dialogue is a really important word for these next 2 weeks. Look, it's no secret. We live in a divided world, right? We've got liberals and conservatives, red, blue, you name it. We're divided on it. It's also no secret that we live in a divided church. We disagree. You go to one church and you're going to hear the gospel preached one way. You go to another church, you're going to hear it preached another way. And sometimes people feel a little confused by that and we're not sure what to do. That's the world that we live in. And in some ways, this is nothing new, right? Whether you're talking about church matters or whether you're talking about, just regular matters of state or politics, people have always disagreed about things. We human beings disagree a lot. Even in the church, I'm reminded of a story. In the 4th century, there was a lot of debate. The end of the 3rd century, beginning of 4th century, there was a lot of debate around whether Jesus was fully human or fully divine. Remember that the early Christians were still trying to figure all this Jesus stuff out, right? Stuff that we take for granted today. So there was a big debate going on. And what was interesting is that people got so angry and intense about this debate that they took to the streets in protest, one side against the other. And you know what? The debate came down to one word. Which word do you favor? Which side are you on? And in fact, not just one word. The debate came down to one letter. The difference of one letter in each of these words. That was it. That was it. Well, eventually what ended up happening was the Pope at the time and the Emperor at the time called a synod. They called a council, actually. And they came to a conclusion and they said, okay, no, here's what it is. Jesus is fully human and fully divine. Okay, but you see, we've always been in disagreement about certain matters, and that's just how it goes, right? So in some ways, what's going on in our world now is nothing new. And not only do we disagree, but we strongly disagree about things. Again, people in Constantinople in the 4th century were taking to the streets in protest about this. We don't always take to the streets when it comes to disagreements. We might disagree about ice cream. I might like chocolate ice cream. You like vanilla ice cream. And even though we disagree, we're probably not going to come to blows about it. Although, I don't know, maybe you really, really like vanilla ice cream. I'm not sure. But there are other issues where we do get really intense. So if I'm anti-war and you are pro-war, we might start going like this if we talk about it too much. Or if I'm pro-choice and you're pro-life, we see that happening all around us, right? The argument gets intense, right? The discussion gets intense. And the reason why some conversations get intense, why some disagreements get intense and others don't, is that, some disagreements just aren't all that important. Ice cream flavors, for instance, are not all that important. However, when it comes to things like the right to life or reproductive issues or war, these are really important issues, no matter what you think about them, no matter what your opinion is. And chances are we're going to feel pretty intense about it. And you know what? It's probably a good thing to feel intense about these issues, right? If you think, these issues are no big deal, if your heart rate doesn't go up when people start talking about some of these important issues, then you might want to go to the doctor and have her check your pulse. And again, it's true whether or not you're for a particular side or against a particular side, that doesn't matter. These are important issues, and we need to find ways to engage each other about them. But the challenge is always going to be this. The more passionate we get about an issue, the more difficult it can be to bridge some of those divides. When we're talking, if you and I were talking about an issue that's really important to me, and you disagree with what I'm saying, my brain is going to start interpreting what you're saying as a threat. right? So I'm going to start saying, wow, this guy, it's not just that you disagree with what I'm saying, you disagree with me. And how dare you disagree with me? And when that happens, what happens in the brain is interesting. There's a little piece of the brain called the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that's always detecting threats, right? Whether it's a physical threat or an emotional threat. And so when we get in that space, and we've all been there before, you know how it feels, right? Your heart starts beating really fast, and your breathing starts to speed up, and your eyes dilate and they get real big, right? Because your body is preparing either to run away or for a fight. And it's the same thing whether or not we're talking about an issue that we disagree about strongly, or whether I'm looking at a crocodile. My brain is gonna react the same way. And what happens is when I start to feel threatened, there's a chemical that goes through my bloodstream called adrenaline. And that causes all these changes inside of me. But the most important change that happens is that adrenaline turns off this front part of the brain here. And this front part of the brain, this is where we do our logical thinking and our creative thinking. And logic and creativity are the two things that we need the most for solving disagreements. So when we get real worked up and intense, when we start getting in each other's faces, when we rail up, it gets really hard to solve some of these disagreements. And there's where the problem lies, right? And so at that point, when I get all triggered like that, I get defensive. And I'll do one of two things. Either I'm going to retreat, I'm going to run away from you. I don't want to engage you in any kind of conversation. And instead, I'm only going to go and talk with and hang out with people who agree with me. I can call those going to your echo chamber, right? Or else what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to attack you and destroy you or humiliate you, right? Which is also sometimes the choice that we make. But the thing is, it's really hard to be church when we're at each other's throats like that. And it's really hard to be a nation when we're at each other's throats like that. And so the challenge is, how can we disagree about really important issues and still find a way forward together? You know, since Pope Francis was elected in 2013, he has said repeatedly that he wants us to be a church that dialogues. Dialogue is the only way through some of these really intense disagreements. And unlike during the 4th century, there's no authority out there, there's no emperor, not even the Pope, can step in and say, nope, this is right and that's wrong. Why? Well, because we disagree. We disagree over authority itself, right? So it doesn't help sometimes if you have these authority figures coming in, stepping in and making these pronouncements. It doesn't solve the issue. Dialogue is the only way that you and I are going to be able to reach out across everything that divides us and find a way forward together. Well, what is dialogue? How do you do it? And that's what we want to talk about these next 2 weeks. And we use the word dialogue a lot. And sometimes we use the word dialogue just to refer to any time two people sit down and talk. But it's more specific than that. When two people talk together, we call that a conversation. But there are different kinds of conversations, right? And dialogue is one type of conversation. So in some ways, it might be easier to say what dialogue is not. So dialogue is not the same as debate. Debate is when two people come together to talk about an issue, to have a conversation about an issue, and each one presents, they're on different sides of the issue, and each one presents his or her arguments to the other, and they go back and forth, right? They go back and forth, and the goal is to convince the other person that you are right and they are wrong. That's the goal, right? So in debates, you have winners and you have losers. Hopefully, that's based on the strength of your argument and not the strength of your right hook, right? So hopefully, and when it comes to a debate, you keep it just verbal. You use your words, huh? And debates are good. They have their place. But the problem with debate is that for some issues, it's not clear what's right or what's wrong. What if both answers are wrong? Or at least not completely right? And that's what happens when we get these really complicated issues. And sometimes when we argue about them, when we're going back and forth trying to prove the other person wrong, what happens is we start to simplify our arguments. We start to dig in, we become entrenched, and then there's nothing more we can learn. And we're no longer open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I'm not 100% right here. And that's a problem. Dialogue also is not about lecturing somebody or trying to teach somebody. Again, lecturing and teaching are fine. They work really well in school. They work really well sometimes even in a church, right? At a pulpit. They have their place, but they're not the same as dialogue. Dialogue isn't when you and I sit down and I tell you what the truth is, right? That's not real dialogue, and that's not going to help us with some of these difficult issues. Because lecturing and teaching moments create a power difference, a power differential. So I place myself as the teacher, as the expert, as the one with the answers. And you have to be passive. You have to sit there and listen, right? Just like you're listening to me now as I go on and on and on. And the problem is that can be condescending. Dialogue is something different. In dialogue, we come together to find a way forward together. And we show up to dialogue because we know that even though we may not agree, even though we may not particularly like each other, we know that we need each other. And we recognize that no matter who's right or wrong, maybe we both have something to learn. In dialogue, we share honestly with one another and we listen honestly to one another. And as I said, it's always been that way. The difference is that now in the divided world we live in, the volume has been turned up so much. And we're at a point now where even if we try to dialogue with one another, the people on our side of the issue will call us soft, right? So we don't even want to talk to one another anymore. And that goes nowhere good, as we've seen. Look, the Synod calls us to be a church that dialogues, a church that builds bridges, not fortress walls. This is the vision that we're being invited to.